We've been spending a lot of time recently asking the question of who we are as a community, who we are as Crave. And we spent a day as a community together yesterday just sharing our stories and then saying, what does that mean about who we are as a church, what's our direction, and where are we going? And I think what I want to say today, I'm going to be preaching from a passage in Mark 1, which has been a passage that I've come back to many times in my life. But what I want to say is that you can't form an identity for yourself that's not authentic. You have to act out of the truth of who you are and the truth that God has placed in your heart. And that is just as true for every single individual as it is for every single community. Like a community has to be true to themselves in the same way that a person has to be true to themselves. And last week I was sharing about how one of the transformations that I've gone through as being part of this community is that I found myself transforming from being a pastor as a professional person, being a pastor as a calling that I had, but a job that I had to do, and something that I had a professional practice about, to actually relating to people as being my family. And actually, you know, that's been a process of trust, that you're actually able to invest a person with that energy that you have within you, because, you know, we all can invest in maybe one or two communities in our life in a really strong way. And you need to know that it's safe to do that, and you need to know that you trust people enough to do that. So part of that process for me has been that a professional wall has come down, and I've been able to start to relate to a community as being authentic, as being myself, as actually speaking out of my truth. And what I really believe is that if you're not coming from that place of authenticity, then what you do is ultimately going to fail, because it's actually not you who's working in it, and it's not the Spirit that's working through you, because the Spirit doesn't work there unless there's truth. The Spirit doesn't work there unless there's authenticity. And all of us have stories from our lives and times when we've tried to fit in somewhere and it's been inauthentic, and that has been a failure. And then we've tried somewhere else and we've been true to who we are, and we've actually fitted in there. Now I come back to Mark chapter 1 again and again in my life, because it's this gospel that just kind of erupts with Jesus preaching. Like a lot of the gospels have this long period of introducing Jesus and going through the birth and all of those different stories. And in Mark, Jesus is just there and everyone's saying, who is this person? Who is this man? What is going on with this person who's doing all of these things? And they struggle with the question of trying to find out who Jesus is. And Jesus struggles with that question himself. And the gospel opens with a voice from heaven saying, this is my son whom I love. And so when you read, you know who Jesus is, but they go through this journey of trying to figure it out. And by the end of the gospel, the disciples are still a bit clueless about that. But, you know, the question gets posed again and again on the way there. And I find that when I read it, what I'm asking is, who am I going to say that Jesus is? But also, who am I going to say that I am? Because here is Jesus working in our lives. And when we step out and say, I'm going to be a Christian and I'm going to do ministry and I'm going to serve, then we're claiming to be part of what Jesus is doing. And we're claiming that Jesus is working through us. And we believe that what this community does is the action of Jesus. So when we make a decision about who we say Jesus is, we're actually saying who we are. We're finding our own identity. We're forming an identity as a community. And for that reason, that opening chapter of Mark, where it poses the question to you in so many different vivid ways, just forces you to be honest about who you are. It brings you to a place of authenticity. And that's why I love that chapter so much. And when I'm confused and when I'm lost, it's something that I come back to. And it never fails to put me back on a place of a path of truth and speaking authentically about who I am. The disciples are there in that opening gospel, and they haven't figured it out yet. Jesus has found out who he is from this voice from heaven. And everywhere that Jesus goes, people respond to it by being healed. Demons are cast out, like people have that experience of being made whole again when they were broken. And those demonic voices know who Jesus is. They scream, I know who you are, you're the Son of God. And they know, but who else knows? The Pharisees and the religious authorities are standing around watching with this critical eye, and from their perspective, they can't get it. But in chapter 1, which is what I'm going to read a little bit from today, Jesus has to ask the question for himself. And he goes through an experience of being pulled in a few different directions and having to make a decision about how is it that he is going to step out in truth and what it is that he was here to do. And he ends up saying, this is what I came here to do. And I want to share that experience that Jesus had, that I've walked through with him many times as I've come back to this story. And invite you to ask that question about yourself. What is it that I came here to do? Jesus is able to somehow find, by the end of this chapter of Mark, this is who I am, this is what I'm here to do. And I want to invite you to find a way to say that about yourself. I know what it is that I'm doing. I've actually found my ministry. And as soon as they left the synagogue where Jesus had been preaching, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up, and then the fever left her, and she began to serve. But I think that as we read through this story, you'll see that Jesus was tempted to get sidetracked with all of this stuff, all of this helping people, and all of this doing stuff that was exciting. And there was a true purpose that Jesus had, that he knew about. And he had to say really clearly, at the end of the story, he says, this is what I came to do. And he's making a decision about the way forward. Now, I think that at this point, when I read it, I think about what Jesus must have been going through and what he must have been feeling. And Jesus has come back from the synagogue where he's been preaching. He's healed people there, he's cast out demons. And he must have been feeling good about himself. And he has a group of followers around him. And this is new. These guys have just shown up there. And it must have been a good time. And he's acting with authenticity. And he gets to this house, and somebody's relative is sick. And he just says, okay, I'm going to pull you out of bed and I'm going to heal you. And it's becoming habitual for him. And the woman goes straight away back to, I guess as you would expect in a household, the matriarch of the home just goes back to the chores as you get well, and she's back in doing that. And it's very routine. And it's starting to become a thing that wherever Jesus goes, he's expected to do these things. And this is something that always happens to us in life. When we have a vision, when we have a purpose, things that are routine start to fall into place and needs start to happen. And what happens with Jesus is there's people reaching out for him everywhere he goes. There's somebody reaching out, there's some need. And he's just starting to, I wonder what it must be like in a society. We have so many around here, it's met easily. In a society where they didn't have medicine, they didn't have industries, they didn't have clean waters, they didn't have flushing toilets, all of this. There must have just been need everywhere that you go. So a person who's able to walk through and create miracles and create healing and all this different stuff, you wouldn't be able to step outside of your front door without there being this overwhelming amount of need coming at you. And we experience that as a church. We kind of lock into this thing we're going to do. Okay, we're going to make a church here. And we've always said from the beginning of our time as a community group, we are not going to be about being Sunday Christians. We don't believe that that's the right way to do. And yet one of the things that everyone kind of recognized yesterday when we had this vision day is that such a high percentage of our energy is right here on Sundays. So how is it that we knew God has called us to this, to bring the gospel and to bring the power of Jesus into our everyday lives, but the regular everyday, the routine and the need just pull at it, and eventually you kind of end up slotting into this particular routine. It's a trap that everyone could fall into, and here is Jesus being pulled into it. One thing that I've learned throughout my life, and I've never known an exception to this, and I know so many people who've had the same experience, is that whenever the Spirit moves, no matter what the Spirit is doing, there is a distraction somewhere. Now, I don't know who is organising that. I won't speculate about that. But there always seems to be at least one thing. And it can happen in the smallest of ways. It can happen when you just say, I'm going to take some time to worship God now. There's the distraction. Or a group of people get together and say, we're going to try and set out to achieve this, and there's the distraction. It's like clockwork. It comes in from somewhere. And it's something that you see constantly in Jesus' life. And Jesus talks about it by the name Satan. So that might be a clue as to where it's coming from. I don't know. That's up to you to think about how you think of those things.